They say the desert doesn't keep secrets. It bakes them out of you, same as it does the water. But for a man like Samuel Cain, secrets were the only water he had left. He was a bounty hunter, a man paid to find other men's truths, all while running from his own. His latest quarry was a ghost named Colum Corrigan, a man worth $500 dead or alive. But what Samuel found in that desolate cabin, huddled in the shadow of his target, wasn't gold or glory. It was a woman, a whisper, and a dusty leather sack that held a secret far more dangerous than any outlaw. A secret that would unravel a man's entire life. The sun was a merciless hammer over the Arizona territory, beating down on the cracked earth until it shimmered with heat. For 3 days, Samuel Cain had followed the tracks, a ghost trailing a ghost. His horse, a sturdy buckskin named Boulder, plodded onward, its head low. Samuel didn't need to guide him. The horse knew the rhythm of the hunt as well as he did. It was a rhythm of patience, silence, and the ever-present taste of dust and regret. Samuel was a tall man, lean as a whip, with shoulders broadened by years of hard riding and harder fights. His face was a roadmap of his life, tanned and weathered, with lines etched around eyes the color of a stormy sky. He wore a dusty brown duster, worn jeans, and a Stetson pulled low, its brim shadowing a past he never spoke of. Strapped to his hip was a Colt Peacemaker, its walnut grip worn smooth by a familiar hand. He wasn't a lawman anymore. The silver star he'd once worn was long gone, traded for the cold, simple calculus of bounty hunting. Wanted posters were clearer than laws, and dead men told no lies. The man he was tracking, Colum. The ghost Corrigan was wanted for robbing a federal payroll wagon near Tucson. Corrigan was known for his cleverness, his ability to disappear into the landscape like a wisp of smoke. But he'd made a mistake. A homesteader's wife back in dusty Sonora Springs had seen him, recognized the distinctive silver conchos on his saddle. She'd also mentioned he wasn't alone. A woman was with him, though the witness couldn't tell if she was a partner or a hostage. Samuel didn't much care. The poster said, Colum Corrigan. The price was for him. Attachments were just complications. The tracks led him to the foothills of the Chiricahua Mountains, a jagged spine of rock and pine that clawed at the sky. Tucked away in a narrow box canyon was a dilapidated miner's cabin, barely more than a shack with a thin plume of smoke curling lazily from its stone chimney. It was a perfect hideout, defensible, secluded with a clear view of the approach. Samuel dismounted a half-mile out, tethering Boulder in a copse of mesquite. He moved the rest of the way on foot, silent as a predator. The sun began its slow descent, painting the canyon walls in hues of orange and deep purple. He circled around, climbing the rocky slope to get a vantage point above and behind the cabin. From his perch, he could see a single horse, tied out back, a fine-looking black stallion, with those same silver-conchoed saddlebags. He lay there for the better part of an hour, his Winchester rifle resting on a rock before him, watching. He saw movement inside a silhouette passing the single grimy window. Then the cabin door creaked open. Colum Corrigan stepped out. He was smaller than Samuel expected, wiry and quick, with a ferret-like face and eyes that never stopped moving. He scanned the canyon, a paranoid energy radiating from him. He stretched, scratched his belly, and then turned back inside. This was the moment. He was relaxed, overconfident in his sanctuary. Samuel slid down the slope, his boots dislodging a few pebbles that sounded like an avalanche in the profound silence. He froze, listening. Nothing. He reached the rear of the cabin, pressing his back against the rough-hewn logs. He could hear voices from within, a man's low growl and a woman's soft, pleading tone. So the homesteader's wife was right. He crept to the window, peering through a clean patch in the grime. Corrigan had his back to the door, tending to a pot over the fire. Across the small single room, a woman sat on a rickety cot. She was young, maybe early 20s, with tangled auburn hair and wide, frightened eyes. Her dress was torn at the shoulder, and her wrists bore the faint red marks of having been tied. She wasn't a partner. She was a prisoner. This changed things. Not the job, but the method. A clean shot from the outside was no longer an option. A stray bullet could hit her. It had to be up close. Taking a deep breath, Samuel moved to the door. He drew his Colt, the click-click of the hammer being pulled back, sounding unnaturally loud. With his left hand, he gripped the latch. He didn't kick it in. That was for amateurs and town sheriffs looking to make a show. He lifted the latch gently, pushed the door inward, and stepped inside all in one fluid motion. "Don't move, Corrigan," Samuel said, his voice a low growl that cut through the crackle of the fire. Corrigan spun around his hand, instinctively, darting for the pistol on his hip. He was fast, but Samuel was already there. The barrel of the peacemaker was leveled squarely at his chest. Corrigan's eyes widened first in shock, then in a flicker of recognition. "Kane, I'll be damned. The famous lawman. Heard you'd fallen on hard times. Chasing paper now, are we?" He sneered, but the bravado was thin. "The paper says $500 for you. Dead or alive," Samuel stated flatly, his gaze unmoving. "I'm not feeling particularly sentimental today. Drop the gun belt. Slow." Corrigan's eyes darted to the woman on the cot. A cruel smile touched his lips. "And what about the girl, Kane? You willing to risk her? I can draw and fire before you put me down for good." Samuel didn't even glance at her. His focus was entirely on Corrigan. "You might get a shot off, but it won't matter where it goes. My bullet goes through your heart. You'll be dead before you hear the sound. Your choice." The silence in the cabin was thick enough to choke on. The woman on the cot held her breath, her eyes flicking between the two men. Corrigan's hand hovered over his gun, his fingers twitching. He was weighing his chances, the sweat beading on his brow. He looked at the cold certainty in Samuel's eyes and knew it was no bluff. With a curse, Corrigan slowly unbuckled his gun belt and let it fall to the dirt floor with a heavy thud. "Good choice," Samuel said, motioning with his pistol. "Now over to the wall, hands flat against it." As Corrigan complied, Samuel took a few steps forward, his boots crunching softly on the floor. He never took his eyes off his quarry. The danger wasn't over until the man was bound and gagged. He could feel the woman's stare on him, a mixture of terror and a sliver of hope. He ignored it. She was a complication one he'd deal with later. First, the bounty. He pulled a pair of iron cuffs from his belt, the job almost done. The $500 was almost his. It was simple, clean. Just another name crossed off a list. Or so he thought. With Colm Corrigan facing the wall, Samuel moved with practiced efficiency. He kicked the man's fallen gun belt into a corner, then pressed the cold barrel of his Colt against the base of Corrigan's skull. "Don't so much as breathe wrong," Samuel warned. He holstered his pistol and snapped the iron cuffs onto Corrigan's wrists. He cinched them tight, the metal biting into skin. The bounty was secure. A wave of something that wasn't quite relief, but a familiar sense of finality washed over him. Another job done. More dust, more miles, more money, to drink away the memories it couldn't erase. He turned his attention to the woman for the first time. She was still on the cot, clutching a threadbare blanket to her chest. Now that the immediate threat was gone, her fear seemed to have been replaced by an intense, desperate urgency. She wasn't looking at Samuel with gratitude, but with a piercing gaze that seemed to see right through him. "Thank you," she said, her voice trembling but clear. He took me from the boarding house in Wilcox. Said my father owed him a debt." "Your father," Samuel asked, his tone clipped. He was already thinking about the logistics getting Corrigan back to Tucson, what to do with the girl. She was a witness. He'd have to take her too. More trouble. My father was William Dunn. He drove the stage for Butterfield. She said, her voice catching on the word was. Samuel's brow furrowed slightly. He knew the name. Dunn's stage had been hit about a week ago. The same one Corrigan was wanted for. It wasn't just a payroll robbery. The driver had been killed. "I'm sorry for your loss, Ma'am." He said the words feeling hollow and rehearsed. He started to turn back toward Corrigan, intending to gag him for the long ride back. That's when she stood up, a new fire in her eyes. She pointed not at Corrigan, but at the black stallion's saddlebags, which lay slung over a wooden crate near the door. One of the bags, a heavy leather sack, bulged unnaturally. "Please," she whispered, taking a hesitant step toward him. Her voice was raw, pleading. "I beg you." Samuel paused. "Beg me for what?" "Take them off," she said, her gaze fixed on the saddlebags. "His things. You have to take them off the crate. Look inside." Samuel frowned. "Ma'am, whatever loot he's got in there is evidence. It'll go to the marshal." "It's not loot," she insisted, her voice rising with a frantic edge. "Not all of it. He collects things. Trophies. From his jobs. He was showing them to me. Bragging." Her breath hitched, and a tear finally escaped, tracing a clean path through the grime on her cheek. "Please, just look in the sack. The heavy one." Samuel hesitated. This was irregular. It was a complication he didn't need. But there was something in her tone, a profound and genuine anguish that went beyond her own captivity. It was a plea that resonated with a forgotten part of him, the part that existed before the bounty posters and the lonely trails. With a sigh of weary resignation, he walked over to the crate. Corrigan watched him from the wall, a twisted, knowing smirk on his face. "Curiosity killed the cat, Kane," Corrigan rasped. Samuel ignored him. He lifted the heavy leather sack. It was surprisingly weighty, clinking with the sound of metal, but there was something soft packed in there too. He set it on the floor and loosened the drawstring. The woman whose name he now knew was Abigail Dunn watched him, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles were white. He reached inside, and his fingers brushed against cold, hard metal coins, stolen payroll, no doubt. But beneath them, his fingers found something else. Something soft and rectangular. He pulled it out. It was a small, leather-bound book, a collection of poetry by Christina Rossetti. The cover was worn, the corners softened with age. His breath caught in his throat. His wife Mary had loved Rossetti. She used to read the poems aloud to him on cool evenings on the porch of their small ranch outside of Austin, her voice a gentle melody against the chirping of the crickets. His heart began to pound, a frantic, painful drum against his ribs. It was a coincidence. It had to be. There were thousands of such books in the world. But his hand was trembling as he reached back into the sack. His fingers closed around something small, metallic, and cold. A chain. He pulled it out. The world stopped. The fire, the dust, the woman, the prisoner. It all faded into a roaring silence. Dangling from the chain was a simple silver locket, oval-shaped with a delicate engraving of a single lily on its surface. He didn't need to open it. He knew what was inside. On one side, a miniature portrait of himself, younger, a hint of a smile on his lips. On the other, a picture of Mary, her head resting on his shoulder. He had given it to her on their first anniversary. The lily was for their daughter. Lily. 5 years. 5 years since a stagecoach they were on heading to California to start a new life had been ambushed by raiders. Samuel riding alongside on his horse had been shot and left for dead in a ravine. When he came 2 days later, the world had been burned to ash. The stagecoach was gone. The official report said it was Apaches. All passengers presumed dead. No bodies ever found. He had spent a year searching, a madman chasing whispers and shadows, until hope withered and died, leaving only a cold, hard emptiness in its place. That emptiness had turned him into the man he was today. And now here was Mary's locket, and her favorite book, in the sack of a common thief. Samuel Kane, the man who never showed emotion, the man whose face was a stone mask, froze. His hand holding the locket shook violently. The silver gleamed in the firelight, a star of impossible agony. He slowly raised his head, his storm-grey eyes locking with Abigail Dunn's. The frantic terror in her eyes was gone, replaced by a deep, shared sorrow. She knew. She had to know. "Where did you get this?" he asked, his voice a choked, broken thing he didn't recognize as his own. He wasn't talking to Corrigan. He was talking to her. Before she could answer, a guttural laugh echoed from the wall. "Looks like the great Samuel Kane has a ghost of his own." Colum Corrigan sneered, his voice dripping with malice. "You want to know where I got that trinket, lawman? You should ask who I was working for. The Apache story. That was a nice touch, wasn't it? Made everything so simple." Samuel turned a murderous rage, eclipsing the shock. The $500 bounty was meaningless. The world had just cracked open, revealing a fresh hell beneath. This wasn't the end of a job. It was the beginning of a war, and the first casualty was the man he used to be. The sound of Corrigan's mocking laughter was a lit fuse in the powder keg of Samuel's soul. He crossed the cabin in 2 long strides, grabbing Corrigan by his shirt front and slamming him back against the log wall. The entire shack trembled. "Who?" Samuel snarled, his face inches from Corrigan's. The silver locket was still clutched in his fist, its edges digging into his palm. "Who were you working for?" Corrigan gasped, a flicker of genuine fear finally breaking through his smug facade. "Easy, Kane. Easy. A man like you kill me, you get nothing. I'm about 2 seconds from finding out if that's true." Samuel hissed, the pressure in his chest building until he felt he might explode. "His name is Thorne," Corrigan choked out. "Marcus Thorne." Samuel stared the name, meaning nothing to him. "Thorne," he repeated the name, tasting like ash. "Runs the whole Verde Valley, practically." Corrigan continued, speaking quickly now. "Lives like a king in Prescott. Banking, mining, ranching. You name it, his brand is on it. He's got judges in his pocket, a whole company of hired guns on his payroll. He's not a man you cross." "Why?" Samuel demanded. "Why the stagecoach? It wasn't carrying gold." "Never was about gold," Corrigan said, a pained grimace on his face. "There was a passenger, a geologist from back east. Fella named Patterson. He'd done surveys for the railroad and stumbled onto something Thorne wanted kept quiet. Proof that Thorne's biggest silver mine, the Lucky Spaniard, was actually on federal land, not on his patented claim. Patterson had the maps, the assays, the proof. He was taking it to the territorial governor in California. The pieces began to click into place, each one a hammer blow to Samuel's heart. It wasn't a random raid. It was a targeted assassination. His wife and daughter, they were just collateral damage, innocent bystanders in a rich man's game. "So Thorne hired you and your crew to hit the stage, kill Patterson, and get those documents?" Samuel said, his voice dangerously low. "I was just a gun, Kane, one of a dozen," Corrigan pleaded. "I didn't even know who we were hitting till we were there. Thorne's foreman, a real bastard named Sterling, he ran the show. He's the one who gave the orders." Samuel's grip tightened. "And the passengers? My wife, my little girl." Corrigan's eyes darted away. Things got messy. Sterling ain't the type to leave witnesses. He told us. No one walks away. He swallowed hard. I grabbed what I could. A few valuable-looking things. Souvenirs. Souvenirs. The word was so casual, so vile, it made Samuel's vision swim with red. He wanted to crush the man's throat, to silence the voice that spoke of his family's murder as a footnote. But he held back the cold logic of the bounty hunter, wrestling with the raw grief of the husband and father. He needed more. He released Corrigan, who slumped against the wall, gasping for air. Samuel turned to Abigail Dunn. She hadn't moved, her face pale, her expression one of grim understanding. "My father," she said softly, her voice steady, now hardened by the truth. He wasn't in on it. But he must have known something. He told me the night before he left Wilcox that he was carrying a heavy load, and it wasn't the payroll. He said if anything happened to him, I should go to the U.S. Marshal in Prescott and mention the name Patterson. Her story intertwined with his two threads of grief, spun by the same monstrous hand. "That's why Corrigan came for you," Samuel realized, "to silence you before you could follow your father's instructions." Abigail nodded, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. "He found me at the boarding house. Said Thorne sent him to collect on my father's debt." A heavy silence fell over the cabin, broken only by the crackling fire. In the space of 10 minutes, Samuel's world had been rewritten. For 5 years he had been mourning a tragic accident, a cruel twist of fate. Now he had a name, a face, and a reason. The cold emptiness inside him was gone, replaced by a raging, white-hot furnace of purpose. "This Thorne," Samuel said, turning the name over in his mind. "He's in Prescott, like a spider in the middle of his web," Corrigan confirmed from the floor. Samuel looked from the cuffed outlaw to the grieving daughter. His original plan to drag Corrigan to Tucson for a meager $500 seemed absurd now. Tucson was south. Prescott was north. Justice was north. He looked at Abigail. Her fear was gone, replaced by a quiet, steely resolve that mirrored his own. She had lost her father. He had lost his family. They were both victims of Marcus Thorne. "What's your plan, Mom?" Samuel asked, his voice softer than before. "I was going to follow my father's wish," she said, lifting her chin. "I'm going to Prescott. I'm going to find the marshal, and I'm going to tell him everything I know." "The marshal in Prescott is likely on Thorne's payroll," Samuel countered grimly. "A man that powerful doesn't leave the local law to chance. You'll walk into the sheriff's office and be dead or disappeared by nightfall." Her face fell, the hope draining from it. "Then what can I do?" Samuel looked at Corrigan, a new cold plan forming in his mind. This lowlife wasn't a bounty anymore. He was a key. "We need leverage," Samuel said, thinking aloud. "We need something Thorne is afraid of, and right now the only thing we have is him." He jerked his head toward Corrigan. "He's a witness, a loose end Thorne's man Sterling failed to tie up." A new, unspoken understanding passed between Samuel and Abigail. Their paths, born of separate tragedies, had converged. They were no longer a bounty hunter and a victim. They were allies. "We're going to Prescott," Samuel declared. It wasn't a question. "And we're taking him with us." He strode over to Corrigan and hauled him to his feet. "Get ready to ride." "You're crazy, Kane," Corrigan sputtered. "You can't just ride into Prescott. Sterling will have men everywhere. They'll kill us all." "That's the idea." Samuel said, his eyes like chips of ice. "We're not going to ride in quiet. We're going to make noise. Let Thorne know his ghost is coming back to haunt him. Let's see how the spider reacts when something starts shaking his web." He turned to Abigail. "Can you ride?" She nodded without hesitation. "Yes." "Good. Get what you need." We leave now." While Abigail gathered a small bundle of her meager possessions, Samuel gagged Corrigan securely and hoisted him onto the black stallion. He then went to retrieve Boulder, his mind a whirlwind of tactics and grief. The locket was now tucked safely in his shirt pocket, resting against his heart, both a comfort and a searing brand. As the last light of day faded and the first stars pricked the indigo sky, the unlikely trio set out from the box canyon. A disgraced lawman turned avenger, a killer turned living proof, and a coach driver's daughter with a will of iron. They were headed north into the heart of Marcus Thorne's territory. They were outgunned, outmanned, and riding toward a man who could buy and sell justice itself. They didn't know that word of Corrigan's capture was already on its way to Prescott, carried by a rider from Sonora Springs, who'd been paid a shiny gold eagle to report any news of the outlaw. And in his opulent gaslit office, Marcus Thorne had already given the order to his formidable foreman. An order that was simple and absolute: find them, erase the problem, and leave no trace. A silent, ruthless hunter was now on their trail. A man named Sterling, whose only loyalty was to Thorne's gold, and whose only skill was ensuring that secrets, and the people who kept them, stayed buried forever. The hunt had begun anew. Only this time Samuel was the prey. The journey north was a grueling, tense affair. They traveled by night and hid by day, avoiding main roads and settlements. Samuel pushed them hard, the urgency a fire in his blood. He knew Thorne's reach would be long, and his response swift. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat. Every gust of wind sounded like the hoofbeats of approaching riders. During the day, they'd find shelter in rocky outcrops or dense thickets. Samuel would stand watch, while Abigail rested, her exhaustion clear, but her spirit unbroken. She never complained. She tended to the horses, shared her small rations of dried jerky and hardtack without a word, and watched Samuel with an expression of shared purpose. A silent bond formed between them in the harsh, unforgiving landscape. They rarely spoke of their losses. The grief was a shared atmosphere, too vast to be contained by words. It was in the way Samuel would unconsciously touch his shirt pocket where the locket rested, or in the distant, sorrowful look in Abigail's eyes when she stared out at the horizon. Their prisoner, Colum Corrigan, was a constant, sullen presence. He was terrified not of Samuel, but of who was coming for him. "You're dead men," he'd mumble through his gag whenever Samuel loosened it to give him water. "You don't know Sterling. He's not a man. He's a snake. You'll never see him coming." On the fourth night, as they skirted the edge of the Black Hills, Corrigan's prophecy almost came true. They were watering the horses at a small moonlit creek when Boulder suddenly lifted his head, his ears swiveling, and let out a low nicker. Samuel went still, his hand immediately going to his Colt. "What is it?" Abigail whispered, freezing in place. "Riders," Samuel said, his voice a low hush. "At least 3, coming fast." There was no time to run. They were caught in the open. "Get down," he ordered, shoving Abigail behind a cluster of boulders near the creek bed. He dragged a bound Corrigan with them, pulling him down into the dirt. "You make a sound and the first bullet's for you," Samuel warned him. Seconds later, 3 horsemen crested the nearby ridge, their forms silhouetted against the starry sky. They weren't riding casually. They were trackers, their heads scanning the terrain. One of them pointed down toward the creek. They had seen their tracks. The man in the lead was tall and slender in the saddle, wearing a long, light-colored coat that seemed to gleam in the moonlight. Even from a distance, he exuded an aura of lethal calm. It had to be Sterling. Samuel laid his Winchester on a rock the same way he had at the cabin, but this time he was not the hunter. He sighted down the barrel at the lead rider. It was a long shot, nearly 200 yards in the dark. "When I fire, it's going to be chaos," Samuel whispered to Abigail. "Stay down no matter what." The riders spurred their horses, charging down the slope. Samuel took a breath, held it, and gently squeezed the trigger. The Winchester bucked against his shoulder, its roar shattering the night's tranquility. The lead rider's horse screamed and went down, tumbling head over heels, throwing its rider clear. The other two riders immediately split, firing their pistols wildly into the darkness around the creek. Bullets sparked off the rocks around Samuel and Abigail, whining like angry hornets. "They're trying to flank us!" Samuel yelled over the gunfire. He worked the lever on his rifle, chambering another round, and firing at the second rider, forcing him to swerve and take cover behind a stand of cottonwood trees. The third rider, however, kept coming, charging straight for their position with a reckless bravery. Abigail gasped as he thundered closer his face, a grim mask in the moonlight. Samuel swung the rifle, but the rider was too close, too fast. He dropped the Winchester and drew his Colt just as the horseman was upon them, leaning down from his saddle to fire. Suddenly, from Samuel's other side, there was a desperate scramble. Corrigan, seeing his chance in the chaos, had managed to get to his feet. Instead of running away, he ran directly into the path of the charging rider. "Sterling, it's me, don't shoot!" Corrigan screamed. The rider, shocked, reined in his horse sharply. In that split second of hesitation, Samuel fired. The shot was true. The rider grunted, clutching his chest as he toppled from the saddle and hit the ground with a heavy thud. The second rider, seeing his companions down, fired one last defiant shot before wheeling his horse around and disappearing back over the ridge. The silence that descended was sudden and deafening, broken only by the chirping of crickets and the pained groans of the first rider, whose leg was trapped beneath his dead horse. Samuel was on his feet instantly, his pistol trained on the wounded man. He kicked the man's gun away and turned to Corrigan, who was standing there, trembling, his face ashen. "You saved our hides," Samuel said, his voice laced with suspicion. "Why, he would have killed me too," Corrigan blurted out, his eyes wide with terror. "Sterling's orders were to leave no trace. That includes me." Samuel walked over to the man trapped under the horse. It wasn't Sterling, just one of his hired guns. He looked over at where the lead rider had fallen. The man in the light-colored coat was getting to his feet, seemingly unharmed from the fall. Sterling. He started limping away into the darkness. "Stay here," Samuel commanded Abigail, and took off after him. Sterling was injured, but he moved with a swift, serpentine grace. Samuel tracked him through the brush for 100 yards before Sterling ducked behind a massive rock formation. Samuel took cover the standoff, resuming in the tense, close quarters dark. "Kane." Sterling's voice echoed smooth and unhurried, with no hint of panic. "Thorne offers his regards, and a proposition. $1,000. For you to deliver the girl and the thief and ride away. Forget everything you've learned." "Tell Thorne to go to hell," Samuel shouted back. "A man of principle." Sterling called out, his voice laced with amusement. "Or a man of foolish pride. Your wife and child, Kane. That was unfortunate. Business, you understand. Nothing personal." The casual mention of his family sent a fresh wave of ice-cold fury through Samuel. "It's personal now, Sterling." "Indeed." The reply was followed not by a gunshot, but by the sound of scuffling gravel as Sterling retreated further into the rocks. Samuel didn't pursue. It was a trap. He waited, listening for 5 long minutes before cautiously making his way back to the creek. Sterling was gone, vanished into the night. When he returned, he found Abigail kneeling beside Corrigan, who was now sitting up his bravado, gone, replaced by a raw animal fear. "He's right, you know," Corrigan whispered, looking at Samuel. "You can't beat Thorne. He owns everything, everyone. But But maybe there's a way." "What way?" Samuel asked, reloading his Colt. Corrigan hesitated, then seemed to make a decision. That geologist Patterson, he wasn't just carrying maps. He had a journal. Sterling's men took the maps, but I saw Patterson hide the journal just before they shot him. He slipped it inside a hollowed-out book he was carrying. Samuel froze his hand, stopping its motion. "A book of poetry." Corrigan nodded. "A little leather one. I saw it fall from the book when I was grabbing things later. I didn't think nothing of it, just a little diary." Tucked it back inside. He looked at the book which Abigail had taken from the saddlebags and now held in her hands. "The proof you need might not just be my word. It might be in there, in Patterson's own hand." Abigail's hands trembled as she opened the worn book of Rossetti poems. Tucked between the pages, so thin it was almost undetectable, was a small, cheaply made notebook. Her eyes met Samuel's, and in that moment, the entire nature of their quest shifted once more. They didn't just have a witness anymore. They might just have the victim's own testimony from beyond the grave. But it was what Corrigan said next that chilled Samuel to the bone. "There's something else, Kane," Corrigan said, his voice dropping to a barely audible whisper. "Something I saw, that Sterling didn't. When they hit the stage, your wife." He paused, struggling with the words. "She fought back, tried to protect your little girl. Sterling, he shot her. She went down." Samuel closed his eyes, the image a fresh wound in his mind. "But the girl," Corrigan continued, his voice urgent. "The little one. Lily. She wasn't killed. Thorne was there. He watched the whole thing from a ridge. After it was over, he rode down. He saw the girl crying over her mother. And he took her cane. He lifted her up onto his horse and rode away with her. Sterling wanted to kill her, but Thorne said no. He took her." Samuel's world, which he thought could not be shattered further, broke into a million pieces. His daughter wasn't dead. The grief he had carried for 5 years was for a ghost. Lily was alive, and in the hands of the man who had murdered her mother. The rage, the grief, the hope, it all coalesced into a single blinding point of light. He was no longer an avenger seeking justice for the dead. He was a father, and he was going to get his daughter back. The first light of dawn was a fragile grey thing filtering through the towering ponderosa pines that stood like sentinels around Prescott. The town emerged from the gloom, not as a rough-and-tumble outpost, but as a monument to one man's will. The air, crisp and cool with the scent of pine, was different here. It lacked the raw, untamed freedom of the open territory, replaced by a subtle, pervasive sense of order and ownership. Thorne's ownership. They saw it everywhere. The 2-story brick buildings lining the unnaturally wide main street were clean, their windows glinting in the morning sun. A sign for the Thorne Mercantile boasted goods from back east. Across from it, the Prescott Bank had the name M. Thorne President etched in gold leaf on its glass door. Even the clatter of wagons on the street seemed more subdued, the laughter from the saloons not yet awake, as if the town itself held its breath until its master was ready for the day. For Samuel, every brick, every pane of glass was a silent testament to a crime, a structure built upon the foundation of his family's ruin. The sight didn't intimidate him. It was like pouring oil on the fire of his resolve. They reined in their horses in a dusty alleyway, the grand facade of the town before them. Corrigan, pale and trembling, pointed a shaky finger. The marshal's office is there next to the assayers. Small place, easy to miss. Thorne's ranch, his real throne, is north of town. You can see the white fences from here if you know where to look. Samuel turned to Abigail. The journey had stripped away her initial fear, forging it into a weapon of quiet resolve. She clutched the precious bundle, the worn book of poetry containing Patterson's damning journal, as if it were a holy relic. "The plan holds," Samuel said, his voice low and steady, a stark contrast to the storm raging within him. "You go to Davis. Don't just give him the journal. Tell him everything. Your father, the stagecoach Corrigan's confession. Make him see the whole rotten picture. He has to believe you." "He will," Abigail said, her gaze unwavering. She looked at him, her eyes searching his. "Samuel, what you and Corrigan are about to do, it's suicide." "It's a diversion," he corrected, though they both knew the line was thin to the point of non-existence. "Thorne is a man who craves control. He won't expect a direct assault. He'll expect us to be hiding, cowering. When we show up on his doorstep, it'll rattle him. It'll make him focus on us. Give you the time you need with the marshal. Davis won't move against a man like Thorne without an army or undeniable proof. You're bringing him the proof. We're bringing him the chaos. Be careful," she whispered, her voice thick with an emotion she couldn't name. It was more than gratitude, deeper than alliance. It was the profound connection of two people who had walked through the same fire. "Justice for your father, Abigail," Samuel said, his hand briefly touching his shirt pocket, feeling the solid outline of the locket. "And I'm going to get my daughter." It was a promise, a vow made under the cold morning sky. He watched her dismount, her back straight, and walk with determined steps toward the small, unassuming building that housed the only potential for true law in this town. She didn't look back. Samuel turned to Corrigan. "Let's go call on the devil." Thorne's mansion was even more obscene up close. It wasn't just a house. It was an arrogant declaration of power, a sprawling Victorian monstrosity of white wood, dark green trim, and countless gables. It sat amidst acres of unnaturally green lawn, a sight so out of place in the arid landscape it felt like a scar. A pristine white fence, looking more like a cage to keep the world out than to keep livestock in, enclosed the entire property. Armed men patrolled its length, their rifles glinting. "The service gate is back through that grove of aspens." Corrigan breathed, his eyes wide with a familiar terror. By the kitchens and the ice house, usually just one man there. Old Jebediah, if he's still alive, half-deaf and half asleep most days. They moved with the silence of ghosts, using a shallow creek bed for cover. As they approached, they saw the guard. It wasn't an old man. It was a young, alert hand with a repeating rifle held at the ready. Corrigan cursed under his breath. "Plans changed," Samuel whispered. He picked up a rock the size of his fist. "Stay here. When he's down, we have maybe a minute before someone wonders where he is. We go in fast." Samuel circled around, moving through the brush without a sound. He emerged 30 yards behind the guard. He tossed the rock into a thicket on the opposite side of the path. The guard spun around at the sharp crack of a breaking branch, leveling his rifle at the sound. "Who's there?" he called out, taking a few steps toward the noise. It was all the opening Samuel needed. He closed the distance in a silent rush, a shadow detaching from other shadows. The guard sensed him at the last second, turning his mouth opening to shout a warning, but Samuel's arm was already around his throat, cutting off the sound. A brief, muffled struggle, and the man went limp. Samuel and Corrigan dragged him into the dense undergrowth, taking his rifle and pistol. The service door was unlocked. They slipped inside into the belly of the beast. The sudden coolness and silence of the house were jarring. The air smelled of beeswax and money. They moved through a labyrinth of corridors past a cavernous kitchen where servants were already beginning their morning tasks, their voices a low hum. Samuel felt a profound sense of trespass, but also of reclamation. Every polished floorboard, every gilded mirror, every portrait of a stern-faced ancestor Thorn had probably invented mocked him with the life his daughter now lived, a life paid for by his wife's death. They heard voices from up ahead from behind a set of large, ornate oak doors. One voice was smooth, cultured, and utterly calm. The other was clipped and deferential. Thorn and Sterling. Samuel looked at Corrigan, whose face was slick with sweat. He gave a sharp nod. Taking a deep breath, Samuel pushed the doors open and stepped into the study. The room was Marcus Thorn personified, walls lined with books that had likely never been read, maps of the territory, showing his vast land holdings, and a massive oak desk that served as a throne. Thorn sat behind it, dressed in a silk smoking jacket, a cup of coffee steaming at his elbow. He was in his late 50s, with a mane of perfectly coiffed silver hair, a neatly trimmed goatee, and the pale, predatory eyes of a hawk. He didn't look surprised. He looked bored. Leaning against the marble fireplace, as if he were a permanent fixture of the room, was Sterling. His light-colored duster was immaculate, despite the chase and shootout. His right arm was in a makeshift sling, his hand heavily bandaged, but his left hand rested casually on the butt of a second pistol tucked into his belt. His expression was one of cold, professional hatred. "Mr. Kane," Thorn said, his voice as smooth as polished stone. He gestured with his coffee cup toward Corrigan, who was trembling by the door. "I see you've found my stray dog and returned him. I suppose a reward is in order. Though I must say, your lack of subtlety is disappointing." "I'm not here for your money, Thorn," Samuel said, his voice a low growl that seemed to absorb the light in the room. His Colt was in his hand, held low but steady. "I'm here for my daughter." Thorn's thin lips curved into a patronizing smile. "Ah, the matter of the child. I confess I was wondering when the biological imperative might kick in. But you're mistaken. You don't have a daughter. You have a ghost, a memory. I, on the other hand, have a ward. Her name is Isabel." "Her name is Lily," Samuel bit out, taking a step forward. "Is it—" Thorn mused, steepling his fingers. "The girl I found was a filthy, traumatized little animal crying in the dirt. I gave her a name, an education, a home. I gave her a world. Tell me, Mr. Kane, what could you possibly offer her? The back of a horse, a life spent looking over her shoulder. She plays the pianoforte. She speaks passable French. She is a lady. You would be as alien to her as a creature from the moon. In fact," he added, his voice dropping with surgical cruelty, "she has been taught to fear rough, violent men. Men exactly like you. Your appearance here would only serve to terrify her." Every word was a precisely aimed dart, designed to unman him, to make him doubt his own purpose. From the fireplace, Sterling watched, his cold eyes missing nothing, his body coiled like a snake. "She deserves to know the truth," Samuel insisted, his knuckles white around the grip of his Colt. "Truth is a matter of perspective," Thorn countered, leaning forward with a conspiratorial air. "In her truth, her parents died tragically, and a benevolent man saved her. It's a clean, simple narrative. You want to replace that with— what a story of murder, betrayal, and a father who disappeared for 5 years. You would not be liberating her, Kane. You would be destroying her." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. "I am her father in every way that matters. You are just a biological accident." The rage in Samuel was a physical thing, a pressure building behind his eyes. He saw Sterling's left hand tense, a subtle shift of his weight. "You're going to take me to her," Samuel said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "She's going to hear my side, and she is going to choose." Thorn actually laughed, a short, sharp, ugly sound, devoid of humor. "There are no choices here, only consequences. "Sterling, please show Mr. Kane the consequence of his poor judgment." It was the signal. Sterling's left hand blurred as it went for his gun, but Samuel was already moving, his senses, screaming, his instincts, honed by 100 such desperate moments. He didn't fire at Sterling's chest. A wounded snake was less predictable than a dead one, but a disarmed one was useless. Samuel's Colt bucked in his hand, the shot deafening in the enclosed space. Sterling cried out, not in pain, but in sheer disbelief, as the bullet ripped through his left wrist, sending his second pistol clattering across the polished floor. Almost simultaneously, a second flatter pop echoed from the doorway. Colm Corrigan, his face a mask of pure terror, stood with a tiny silver derringer clasped in his shaking hands. He had fired wildly, a desperate act of a cornered rat. The small bullet struck Marcus Thorne high in the shoulder, spinning the powerful man in his opulent chair. Thorne roared a sound of fury and shock clutching his shoulder as he fumbled to pull open a heavy drawer in his desk, where Samuel knew a gun would be waiting. There was no more time for talk, no more room for choices. There was only the final, brutal calculus of survival. Samuel raised his Colt, sighted down the barrel at the center of Thorne's chest, and fired. The shot was definitive. Marcus Thorne jerked backward, as if hit by a physical blow. He looked down at the rapidly blossoming red stain on his pristine white shirt, his eyes wide with the ultimate surprise of a man who never believed his own mortality. He slumped forward, his head hitting the desk with a soft, final thud. Silence descended thick and heavy, smelling of cordite and blood. Sterling, clutching his two ruined hands, stared at his dead employer, his face a canvas of shock and fury. He made a desperate animalistic lunge for his fallen pistol on the floor. At that exact moment, the study doors crashed open with such force they slammed against the interior walls. U.S. Marshal Franklin Davis, a grizzled man with a face like a bulldog and a double-barreled shotgun held at the ready, filled the doorway. He was flanked by two deputies, and standing just behind him, her face pale but resolute, was Abigail Dunn. "Federal Marshal, drop it, Sterling!" Davis boomed his voice, the very sound of authority. Sterling froze, half-crouched over the gun, his eyes darting between the shotgun and Samuel. The fight went out of him, replaced by a sullen, venomous glare. He slowly straightened up, raising his one good arm. It was over. An hour bled into the next. Thorne's body was removed under a sheet. Sterling Corrigan and the other captured guards were taken into custody. Marshal Davis, sitting behind Thorne's own desk, listened intently as Abigail laid out the entire sordid tale, her voice clear and strong, presenting Patterson's journal as the final irrefutable proof. Finally, the old marshal looked at Samuel, his expression a mixture of professional disapproval and personal sympathy. Thorne had no legal heirs, no wife, no children of his own. With this evidence, his entire estate will be tied up in federal courts for years. But his ward Isabel, she's his only recognized dependent. Ironically, the law will see to it that she inherits everything. This palace of lies will one day be hers. He sighed, running a weary hand over his face. She's in the east parlor. A servant is with her. She's been told there was a business dispute. Nothing more. Samuel felt his legs move, though his mind was numb. He walked down the hall, each step an eternity. He pushed open the parlor door. The room was bathed in soft morning light, filtering through lace curtains. And there, sitting on a plush velvet settee, was a girl of 10. Her auburn hair, the exact shade of Mary's, was tied back with a silk ribbon. Her dress was an immaculate construction of blue lace and satin. She was looking at a picture book, her small hands turning the pages with a delicate grace. She looked up as he entered, and Samuel's breath caught in his throat. She had his eyes, storm grey and full of a quiet intensity. This was Lily. "Hello," she said, her voice soft and polite, carrying the refined accent of a girl raised in privilege. She wasn't afraid. Not yet. Just curious. Samuel opened his mouth, the name Lily, a painful knot in his throat. But looking at her, he saw a stranger. He saw Isabel. He saw the manicured lawns, the pianoforte, the French lessons. And then he thought of himself, a man in dusty, blood-stained clothes, his hands calloused from rains and guns, his soul scarred by violence and vengeance. Thorne's final words echoed in his mind, a venomous, undeniable truth. You would be destroying her. He saw it all in a flash, her terror as he told her the story, her grief at learning the father she knew was a monster, her confusion and resentment at being tied to him, a violent spectre from a past she couldn't remember. He would be taking this perfect, fragile creation and smashing it to pieces for no other reason than to soothe his own aching heart. She shifted on the settee, a flicker of unease in her eyes now. He was a stranger, and he was staring, and his face was a mask of such profound pain that it frightened her. She drew her legs up, clutching her book to her chest. In that small, fearful gesture, Samuel made his choice. The ultimate act of love wasn't reclamation. It was sacrifice. He cleared his throat, forcing a smile that felt like it was cracking his face. "Pardon me, miss," he said, his voice hoarse but gentle. "I seem to have the wrong room. My apologies for disturbing you." He backed away slowly, pulling the door closed, leaving her safe and sound in her gilded cage. He closed the door on his past, on his daughter, on his own heart. Abigail was waiting in the hall. Tears streamed down her face because she had watched him, and she knew. She understood the depth of the sacrifice he had just made. She didn't speak. She simply laid her hand on his arm, and it was enough. Together they walked out of the mansion, out of its shadows, and into the blinding light of the Arizona sun. Samuel Cain had faced down the devil and won. He had found his daughter, and he had lost her forever. But as he and Abigail mounted their horses to ride away from Prescott, the emptiness inside him felt different. It was no longer the hollow ache of loss. It was the heavy, solid weight of a purpose. He wasn't a ghost runner anymore. He was a guardian, a silent, watchful father who would live in the shadows so his daughter could live in the sun. And so the story of Samuel Cain doesn't end with a triumphant reunion, but with a quiet, heartbreaking sacrifice. It reminds us that in the real, gritty West and in our own lives, justice isn't always clean, and victory can taste like loss. Samuel won back his daughter's future by giving up his own, becoming a ghost in her life, so she could truly live. It's a story about the true cost of vengeance and the immeasurable depth of a parent's love. What would you have done in his place if this story of sacrifice, justice, and the untamed heart of the West moved you? Please give this video a like. Share it with someone who appreciates a story with real weight and consequence. And most importantly, subscribe to the channel for more tales from the dusty trails. We have so many more stories to tell, and we'd be honored to have you along for the ride. Thank you for listening.